All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to our West Coasters. We are so excited to be hosting this webinar. And Abby, go ahead and upload the slides if you don't mind. So today we are talking about how to cut energy costs using direct pay for public buildings and how local unions can benefit. I'm Harley Stokes, Senior Policy Advisor with BlueGreen Alliance and your facilitator today. And I'm going to hand it straight away to our Executive Director, Jason Walsh, to kick us off. Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Harley. Hi, folks. My name is Jason. I'm the Executive Director of the BlueGreen Alliance. We are a national coalition of labor unions and environmental organizations. You can see our partners there on the slide, who collectively represent about 15 million people. The principle BGA was founded on remains the guiding principle that binds our coalition partners together today. A core belief that we don't have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment, that we can and must have both. We did a lot of work in the previous Congress to translate that principle into specific policies, many of which were included in the Inflation Reduction Act, a law that represents, in our view, not only the biggest ever investment in climate action and clean energy deployment anywhere in the world, but also the most fully formed embodiment of industrial policy in this country since the New Deal. And by that, I mean Congress invested in economic sectors of strategic importance to the United States and its people, not to mention the fate of the planet, but also designed and conditioned these investments to maximize the public benefits of taxpayer dollars for workers and communities and the environment. The IRA, in our view, is not simply a bunch of programs in a climate bill. It represents a theory of how the clean energy economy should work as a high road economy that works for all of us. There is no better example in the IRA of what I mean by this than the topic of today's webinar, the direct pay provisions of the law's clean energy tax credits. For the first time, public and nonprofit entities such as local governments, school districts, and hospitals can tap into tax credits for a clean energy project, such as solar on schools or geothermal heat pumps for hospitals, and make them even more valuable by adhering to high road labor standards and by procuring materials that are made in the United States. Now, I recognize there may be people on this webinar whose eyes glaze over at the very mention of tax credits, who may consider taxes to be among the most boring topics of all time. But stay with us, because direct pay represents a potentially transformative opportunity. For a city, school, or hospital, it's an opportunity to get reimbursed up to 50% to decarbonize public buildings while saving on energy costs, improving the health and well-being of communities and workers, delivering on climate action, and creating and sustaining good union jobs. For unions, it's an opportunity that spans the labor movement. Building trades unions can provide the skilled workforce needed on these projects. Public and private and service sector unions whose members work in these places can receive the economic and health benefits of clean energy projects, and industrial unions can make the technologies and materials that go into them. There is nothing boring about that. That's pretty damn exciting. So I want to thank the U.S. Department of Treasury, the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, the Menasha Joint School District, and Cheap Metal Workers Local 18 for presenting on this webinar for us. And I want to thank all of you for joining and taking what you learn here today to make this country better. And now I'll pass the mic back to you, Harley.
Jason, thanks so much for setting the table for this discussion. So a little bit of housekeeping and just what we'll go through content-wise. So after this slide, I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Rachel McCleary at Treasury, to sort of do a broad overview of direct pay. Then I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into how we can utilize this for public buildings. Then I'll hand it to John to talk about how building trades can support the uptake of direct pay. And then my colleague Carly is going to give us a view into how Wisconsin is utilizing this opportunity. And then we'll hand it to our colleagues in Menasha, Brian, and Matthew to do a case study on a really exciting direct pay project with the school district. So just to couple quick notes. We will have a recording and a copy of the slides shared out. And also just to note, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to use that throughout the webinar, and that will go to the panelists. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Rachel.
Thank you, Harley and Jason and the entire BlueGreen Alliance for having me speak with you all about elective pay, also known as direct pay, and the historic investments made possible by the Inflation Reduction Act. So as Harley mentioned, my name is Rachel McCleary. I'm a senior advisor at Treasury's Inflation Reduction Act Program Office, and in that role, I lead stakeholder engagement for the clean energy tax credits. Perhaps more importantly for this group, I'm also the daughter of a Ford UAW electrician who is precisely 5 days from retiring after 35 years on the job. So thank you all for all the work that you do every day to build amazing things for our country. It is so appreciated. The IRA Program Office was established last year and is focused on the advocacy, delivery, and programmatic access of those credits as they're made available to the public. And one major function to that work is making sure folks like you are educated and equipped with information about all of these pieces. And today we'll specifically talk about direct pay. Next slide, please. So this would not be a Treasury presentation without some legal disclaimers. I do need to share at the top that this deck provides an overview of certain Inflation Reduction Act tax provisions for general informational purposes only. What I'm sharing today is not itself tax guidance, and the content in the slides I'll be reviewing is based on regulations and other tax guidance on irs.gov. The deck relies on simplifications and generalizations to convey high-level points about IRA tax provisions. Ultimately, we ask that you please refer to guidance issued by the IRS for detailed information on the rules associated with IRA tax provisions. Lastly, I do want to note, Harley mentioned that these slides will be shared, but we also have a longer, more detailed recording of the section I'll be going through that's available at cleanenergy.gov/directpay. Again, that's cleanenergy.gov/directpay. And again, the BlueGreen Alliance will be distributing these exact slides to you all after the presentation. Next slide, please. So what is direct pay? Under this provision of the IRA, tax-exempt and governmental entities that do not owe federal income taxes will, for the first time, be able to receive a payment equal to the full value of tax credits for building qualifying clean energy projects or making qualifying investments. Now, unlike competitive grant and loan programs, which you all might be more familiar with, those are situations where applicants may not receive an award. Direct pay allows entities to get their payment if they meet requirements for both direct pay and the underlying tax credit. So at the Treasury Department, we call these applicable entities. These are entities eligible for direct pay, and they would not normally owe federal income tax. However, by filing a return and using direct pay, these entities can receive these tax-free cash payments from the IRS for clean energy tax credits earned. Again, so long as all the requirements are met, including a pre-filing registration requirement. Next page. Next slide, please. So simply put, direct pay is a force multiplier when it comes to investments in the clean energy transition because more entities are able to unlock these tax credits. And the direct pay amount varies based on the tax credit that's being claimed and the specific features of the project, but it can be significant. And I'll talk a little bit about some examples of that in a moment here. I think importantly, grants and loans can be used in conjunction with direct pay on specific projects. This is a special rule included in the final regulation, and it's so important to the success and uptake of the credit. So what we like to say at the Treasury Department is that direct pay does require clear project planning and compliance, but it does not require applicable entities to compete for a limited pool of competitive grant dollars. So you've got to do the legwork at the front, the planning and the compliance, but if you meet those requirements, you're able to get that money back or that money from the IRS. Next slide, please. So how does it work? Direct pay essentially makes many of the same tax credits available to the private sector, in this case, 12 tax credits, available for the first time to a host of organizations that do not pay taxes. You can see all of them on this slide here. You'll note that this list includes school districts, most public or nonprofit hospitals, local governments, state governments, labor organizations themselves are eligible to claim direct pay. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, it's applicable to 12 different tax credits related to energy generation, carbon capture, manufacturing, vehicles, and fuels. The value of the credit depends on a few things. A, statutory provisions related to the credit itself. B, the applicability of various bonus provisions. But by and large, the bonus provisions are designed to incentivize the creation of good paying jobs, like Jason had talked about, domestic sourcing of materials, and location of investments in low income and energy communities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the clean energy tax credits in general can be broken down into 5 different buckets. There are incentives for energy generation, manufacturing, vehicles, efficiency, fuels and carbon capture. And then there are those cross-cutting provisions I mentioned, which I'll speak to in just a moment. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about ITC, and I know Harley is going to go into that in a moment. But you can see links and resources for this information available on irs.gov/clean energy if there's any one particular credit you're interested in. So until the Inflation Reduction Act, the main incentives to build and deploy clean power in the US were the production and investment tax credits. And those have been subject to short-term extensions that made it really hard for developers and project owners to invest with confidence. So what the IRA did is it stepped in, it provided that long-term 10-year clarity and certainty around clean power generation tax incentives to spur a build out in clean power in years to come. And we're already starting to see those gains. So there's the ITC, which provides a tax credit for investments in renewable energy projects, while the PTC provides a tax credit for production of electricity from renewable sources. So the ITC provides a credit of 30% of the amount spent on systems like solar panels, inverters, transformers, circuit breakers, and energy storage devices. Organizations of all sizes can take advantage of the ITC if they own their solar system. And again, that's in part because of the IRA's new novel credit monetization mechanisms, direct pay, and also transferability. So transferability is the other side of the elective pay coin. The transferability provision allows businesses to transfer all or a portion of any of 11 clean energy tax credits to a third party in exchange for that tax-free cash so that businesses can take advantage of tax incentives if they don't have the sufficient tax liability to fully utilize the credit. So it's another tool in the IRA toolbox to ensure that more entities are taking advantage of these tax credits. And Treasury did recently release guidance on the investment tax credit that provides some clarity for small-scale projects that need to connect to the grid, in addition to those entities and organizations leading offshore wind and battery storage projects. And I would also note on the topic of ITC that there is an incentive now available for standalone energy storage as well. So again, just increasing the amount of industry and technologies it's available for. And on that point, starting in 2025, the law will direct the Secretary of the Treasury to update annually a list of zero emissions energy technologies that will be eligible again to receive ITC. Now, this means that as new innovations emerge, Treasury will be able to quickly recognize those innovations as being eligible for incentives, as opposed to having Congress pass an entire new law to ensure eligibility. So again, we're broadening the scope of applicability here, which is really meaningful for those of you that might be supporting projects in that space. Next slide, please. So this is the other tranche of tax credits available for direct pay. Again, there's more information available at irs.gov/clean energy. Next slide, please. So in thinking about how to structure and finance specific projects, it's so important to fully understand the requirements of the bonus provisions. And these are embedded throughout the entire law to support equity and economic opportunity. And as many of us on the call know, the impacts of climate change are highly unequal, and the costs of extreme weather often fall on those that are least equipped to cope. At the same time, we know there are communities that have borne the brunt of legacy pollution, while also depending on the energy sector for a large share of local economic activity. So in thinking of these pieces, as we build a clean energy economy, we need to ensure these communities are not overlooked or left behind. So that's why this law includes 2 place-based bonus credits, one for energy communities, the other for low-income communities, to help drive investment in those targeted areas. And again, this will help ensure that communities most exposed to the potential costs of the transition are poised to benefit from the economic potential it creates. And for many of the clean energy tax incentives, and the reason again why so many of us are here today is because the Inflation Reduction Act also includes labor standards that must be met to qualify for increased incentive amounts. And finally, there's the domestic content bonus for clean energy projects and facilities claiming the investment tax credits and the production tax credit that meet certain sourcing requirements. And this bonus in particular will help advance the goals of supply chain resilience and onshoring manufacturing jobs and industries that are so important to many of the manufacturing credits within the IRA. So how do all of these pieces actually play out in practice? And before I get to a few closing resources, I want to just walk through a hypothetical of how the potential can grow for a certain project when it comes to integrating some of these bonuses. So let's say that a state was considering developing a solar farm to provide electricity to some of its buildings in one part of the state. Hypothetically, let's say we're talking about a 2-megawatt solar farm where the cost would be maybe $2 million. Under direct pay, the state would file for that investment tax credit of 6% or $120,000. But because of the bonus provision related to prevailing wages and using registered apprenticeships on the project, that 6% investment tax credit can quickly grow to 30% or $600,000 in direct pay. That's why these prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are so important and so incentivizing to contractors and developers. Now, if the project is located in a census tract that qualifies as an energy community, that 30% becomes 40%. And if the project meets those domestic content requirements I mentioned, the tax credit that was originally equal to 6% of the investment cost can instead be equal to half of the investment cost, or $1 million. So I'm not a big math person, but I think it's pretty clear that these are significant returns if you're able to take full advantage of the resources the IRA affords. Next slide, please. So in closing, it's a good time to step back and recognize that this is not only novel and new, but it's very complicated. That's why there are already a robust set of materials on irs.gov/elective-pay and treasury.gov/IRA. We're also working with the IRS on building out some additional materials that more clearly demonstrate these if-then scenarios. And we're also working on a way to share more information on entities that successfully receive direct pay claims. I'm hoping to have more to say on that later this year. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the rest of the discussion and conversation today. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Harley.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that amazing overview. So next slide, please. So I will be doing a little reinforcing of that same messaging. It always helps to repeat, and then also just talking specifically about how public buildings can take up this amazing opportunity. Next slide. So just to take a step back for a second, and this is what Rachel was talking about. So pre-Inflation Reduction Act, we already had clean energy tax credits, but they weren't as reliable, so it was harder to plan out projects, and they were only accessible for private taxable entities. But what the Inflation Reduction Act did was make them more reliable with this 10-year time frame, and also make them accessible to public and tax-exempt entities. And that's what we're talking about today with direct pay, what that looks like. Next slide. So I pulled this from Rachel's slide, so I just want to emphasize that there's more than just ITC for direct pay, but for my part of the presentation, I wanted to focus on the investment tax credit, or ITC, because that's what's really relevant for public buildings. Okay, next slide. So when it comes to ITC and direct pay, what we're talking about is a payment from the IRS for putting clean energy projects into service. And that does not include energy efficient technology. I'll talk a little bit more about that after. But this is about tax exempt entities like public schools, universities, nonprofit hospitals, et cetera, that can all of a sudden access these clean energy tax credits. And that's what it's really about. It's about improving accessibility so that these public entities and nonprofit entities can access clean energy that they might not have otherwise. And, you know, we're really hoping through these education tools, webinars, and other things that every city, every town, every school, hospital has the opportunity to take advantage of this because it's an unlimited resource. And then just to give you a sense of timeline, the way direct pay works is that you put your project into service. And when you file at the deadline, the IRS says that you can expect it approximately 45 days after that. Next slide. So back to my original point, I just wanted to take a minute to harp on this because we get a lot of questions about what's eligible and what's not. So when we're talking about direct pay, when we talk about clean energy technologies, what we're talking about is geothermal, energy storage, solar panels. We're not talking about those energy efficient technologies like LED lighting, HVAC, insulation, et cetera, that is not currently eligible for direct pay. So keep that in mind when we say direct pay and when we say clean energy technology, we're talking about what's on the left. Next slide. So what's the headline? With direct pay, public and nonprofit entities can get reimbursed up to 50 or even 60% of the total cost of a clean energy project for a public building. And again, these are some of the technologies that are most relevant for public buildings that we listed out here. Next slide. And this is just reiterating what Rachel was saying. So to build up to that 50 or 60%, how do you do that? You start with your base credit. So if you're a small project under 1 megawatt, so maybe that's a small solar array on a school, for example, then you have your base credit of 30%. If it's over 1 megawatt, maybe a larger solar array, a large hospital for geothermal, something like that, and it's over 1 megawatt, in order to qualify for your 30% base, you have to reach those labor standards that Rachel mentioned. So registered apprenticeship hours and paying prevailing wage. Otherwise, if you don't meet those standards, the base credit is only 6%. Next slide. Next, oh, thank you. Okay, and then to continue to stack, so if you're in a geographic location that's considered an energy community, so maybe that's a brownfield site, maybe there's you're in a community with a coal plant that closed, or in a low-income community or on tribal land, then you may be eligible for an additional 10% bonus. And the tools that I have screenshotted here, we have that in, we have the link in the slides. So I encourage you to use those specific tools. There's a lot of mapping tools out there, but these were designed specifically to help people figure out if they're eligible for these specific types of bonus credits. Next slide. So just an example on how to stack. So let's say you have a school that has a pretty large solar array. So they're over 1 megawatt and they meet those labor standards, they get their 30% base credit. Then the solar array, a certain percentage of that is manufactured in the US, then they can qualify for the domestic content bonus. That's another 10%. And then maybe they're located in a low-income community or an energy community. That's another 10%. I also wanted to call out the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund because this is also was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's $20 billion essentially for green financing of projects like the ones we're talking about today. So I'll talk a little bit more about this and what that looks like in the next slide, but I just wanted to name that as well. Next slide. So another question we get a lot is, okay, we will get the cash payment after the project's put into service, but how do we finance the project upfront? So this is just looking at what are some of the options around upfront financing. So as I mentioned, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, that $20 billion of green financing will flow mostly through state green banks, credit unions, and CDFIs. So it's worth familiarizing yourself with what's in your environment because there is a whole, there's going to be a lot of money flowing through these institutions. You also have energy savings companies where the model is to stack different incentives. So maybe the tax credits, also if there are grants or utility rebates, stack all of the eligible things that can go into energy efficiency, clean energy, and then they do the work up front and pay themselves with the money saved from those projects. You also have municipal bonds. That's a more traditional form of financing these types of projects, and you'll hear about that from Menasha. And then a newer opportunity is through DOE's Loan Program Office. It's the State Energy Financing Institutions. Essentially, they're looking for state agencies. So let's say like the California Infrastructure Bank can work with the Loan Program Office to identify a project pipeline that can access low interest financing for projects such as the ones we're talking about today. Next slide. So big picture, there's a lot of benefits of these clean energy projects. Of course, top of mind is these significant energy savings and the cash reimbursement that comes with direct pay. We've seen examples of taking those savings and putting them towards increasing staff salaries. You can use them to do additional energy efficiency upgrades, fund additional clean energy projects. There's a whole world of opportunity there. And then, of course, clean energy projects reduce carbon emissions, and they can also make learning and working environments healthier, improve staff retention, and create good local jobs. Next slide. So I just wanted to flag, we have a lot of resources on our website. This is our direct pay user guide. Next slide. We also have an explainer on direct pay in schools. Next slide. And one for hospitals as well. Next slide. And a larger resource around the universe of financing opportunities through federal funding for public buildings. And with that, I am going to hand it over to my colleague, John Doherty.
Thank you, Harley. I am John Doherty. I am a senior advisor at the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. My focus is climate, workforce development, and infrastructure. So I look at a lot of these webinars and get a lot of information from federal agencies on how best to implement and create good jobs from the monies that are coming down through the Inflation Reduction Act, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and those federal programs that are adjacent to that. Next slide, please. So one thing that we know from understanding all of these requirements that are in the IRA that produce these multipliers is that there is a lot of technical assistance needed around every single one of the credits in order to maximize all of those. Many of those are looking to tax consultants. Many of those are looking to federal agencies for technical assistance. But one thing that is best described as workforce development should be reached out to labor unions and who have institutionalized workforce development across the United States for over 100 years. We do that in collaboration with our communities, with workforce development boards, and with a lot of local elected leaders to figure out how best to bridge the gap between community development and economic development, doing that through workforce development. Right. So in doing so, we provide a lot of input on who should be at the table, what type of stakeholders we should be reaching out to ensure that these jobs do equal good jobs, to ensure that our students in our communities are actually receiving the maximum benefit themselves with career opportunities in the energy economy. So a lot of this money that is trained down to whatever entity has taken advantage of the tax credit does translate into good jobs through the prevailing wage requirement and through the apprenticeship utilization requirement. So those stakeholders that are out there, including governors, mayors, elected officials, school districts, CTE programs, all of those can be part of the conversation when realizing this tax credit. Doesn't have to be always part of the conversation, although it should be. But they can provide that technical assistance needed when trying to realize and maximize those tax credits around prevailing wage and apprenticeship. Next slide, please. So learning schools and workforce developments, one of the focuses that we're looking at is the schools that we are doing work in, right? So you have an opportunity, being that there is such a large workforce gap out there in construction and has been for a long time. We offer the opportunities to articulate programs that are in your schools into our registered apprenticeship program, offering a pathway for students to come into our registered programs while also learning about the work that we're doing in the school that you're realizing the tax credit for. So we definitely encourage those schools that are taking advantage of this tax credit to utilize the prevailing wage and the apprenticeship criteria in there to not only multiply the benefit by 5 times for the project that you're doing, but also create a pathway for students to learn about those careers and possibly start a career in the building trades through this. It could really be an engine to opportunity for your community. Next slide, please. So we're not that hard to find. I know that you can Google any registered apprenticeship program in an area, but just to give you a visual on where we are, we're in every single one of the United States, but we also have satellite programs utilizing virtual reality and mobile elevated platforms to do this training within the schools. So I encourage everybody to reach out for the type of programs that we have. We are very flexible in how we administer those and how we put those together. Building pipeline programs, I know, is the buzzword of the day, but it's real, right? So I encourage everybody to reach out to your local building trades and your local trades that are pertinent to the work that you're looking at performing on your project. Next slide, please. So where do we begin? So first thing is to start that conversation. If you're interested in doing one of these projects and taking advantage of direct pay, I would reach out to those that are already building those relationships in the community, right? Folks that are, bringing people into registered apprenticeship programs that cover the building trades, that have worked with a lot of facility managers, that have worked with local elected officials. Your local building trades can point you in the direction of who is in your community, what type of ecosystem can be built around workforce development, and start to build that collaboration around your direct pay project. Next slide, please. And I will pass it off to Matthew Vanderpeek.
Before we hear from Matthew, let's have Carly talk a little bit about what's happening in Wisconsin.
Sorry, I read that wrong.
No problem, John. And thanks, Harley. Hi, I'm Carly Eaton, and I'm the Wisconsin Policy Organizer for the BlueGreen Alliance. In Wisconsin, our coalition is focused on helping school districts, local governments, and other nonprofit organizations understand the benefits of making clean energy and energy efficiency upgrades, how to access federal funding opportunities available to them using direct pay, and how the labor provisions in these laws can support our local union workers. We have an awesome coalition of labor and environmental partners who are dedicated to getting the word out across the state about this opportunity. Along with the Oregon School District and the Wisconsin Education Association Council, or WEAC, we're going to be hosting an in-person event at Forest Edge Elementary, the first net zero energy school in Wisconsin, on June 20th. And at that event, attendees will learn more about how to successfully implement clean energy projects in Wisconsin schools. So if you're working with a Wisconsin school district, please keep an eye out for the invite to that event, or feel free to reach out to me directly. Today, I am really excited to introduce some of our partners in this work from Menasha, Wisconsin. We're going to hear first from Brian Adesso, who is the Director of Business Services for the Menasha Joint School District. Brian is going to tell us about the amazing new net zero school that's being built in Menasha. Then we're going to learn a little bit more about the geothermal heat pumps that are a key piece of this project from Matt Vanderpie, business representative of Smart Local 18. Local 18 is doing this work alongside BGA Partner Union UA, the plumbers and pipe fitters. And this project is a great example of maximizing direct pay, engaging union partners like Smart and UA to meet the labor standards and maximize the benefits, and of course, create a safer and healthier environment for students and staff, including the members of AFT Local 1166 in Menasha. And with that, I will hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Carly. I'm excited to be here and excited to share our project. So like Carly said, we are doing a new construction. If you want to go to the next slide. We're doing a new construction, so it's a $99.7 million building, 223,000 square feet. So it's a rather large building. It'll house grades 5 through 8, and it'll be about 1,000 students. At the height of the project, we'll have 150 workers on site, and almost all the trades are unionized. So we're utilizing a lot of union stuff. Some fun facts is that when we were going through the project, it was not going to be a net zero building. That morphed as we learned more and more about the IRA funding and how that would help the project along. And then through the net zero project, we eliminated natural gas into the building. So there'll be no natural gas. It's a fully electric building. The next slide. So some of the clean energy technologies that we're using. So again, when we started the project, geothermal was a definite into the project. Solar panels were a wish list item. We ended up, we are doing a geothermal because it was in there. And then we added on a large solar array. So it'll be 1.15 megawatts. So about 1.4 million kilowatt hours per year, or the equivalent of powering 119 homes. Along with that, we added on battery storage and a microgrid solution in there. So it was a huge upgrade to the project, and this is what's going to get us to net zero. So then the next slide. And this is kind of what drove everything. So we could start at the solar panels and energy storage. Right now, the cost estimates are 4.4 million. And then to figure out what our direct pay amount would be, we'd look at the base credit for 30%. Because we will be meeting all the prevailing wage and apprenticeship hours. We did use a tax exempt borrowing, so there is a little bit of reduction there for that. So that reduces our 30% down to 25.5%. So for the solar, we'll get back just over $1.1 million. For the geothermal, a similar thing, except for these numbers are a lot bigger, because part of this direct pay IRA funding is that things that touch the system are also eligible. So geothermal, we're running it into it's powering our hot water supply, it's powering our kitchen freezer and refrigerator, and then it goes to the heat pumps. And since we don't have any natural gas in the building, almost all that is eligible for the credit. So we do the same thing with the base credit. All that's going to meet prevailing wages and apprenticeship. And then the bonus credit, we're not sure if we're going to get the domestic content that's going to shake out. With solar, we're pretty sure we're not going to, because right now the U.S. domestically produced solar is just coming online. So we're a little bit early in the game for that. And then all the steel is coming from Michigan. And then our direct pay numbers too are very, very conservative. So we hope to get more than that back. And I just wanted to say that I saw some Q&A on why wouldn't we just do the 6% and forget about the 30%? This is totaling up to $3.8 million. If we would just do the 6%, it would be $760,000. And for us in our area, it's not costing us anything more other than just some time to get us up to the 30%. And we're happy to have union members working on our projects. Okay, next slide. So like I said, our direct to pay very conservative amount is $3.8 million. And then we do anticipate annual savings of $135,000 per year. We do hope to get this money 45 days after we submit, which would be incredible. And then we want to move on to our next project, which will be replacing some roofing on one of our buildings and then adding solar onto that after that roofing is complete to generate more savings. And then next slide. So then I just wanted to, it was talked about many times, but there is labor standards for the 30%. We talked about the 6% base and then the 5 times multiplier if you meet the apprenticeship. We ended up hiring an accounting firm to track everything because our project is so large and there's so many moving pieces to it and so many subcontractors that we hired someone to do all the tracking for us. in case we would be audited from the IRS on our claim. Our last hurdle was kind of, I won't say a hurdle, but things so that we're trying to figure out is apprenticeship hours, because a lot of this stuff is still coming out and being developed. But prior to 2024, when our project started, it was 2.5% of total hours needed to be from apprentices. And then now it's 15% in 24. The issue that we were struggling with, the ratio of journeymen to apprentices, because that's a little difficult, I guess, in the field. But we were told it's based on the union contract, which everyone is meeting anyways. So we go back to what the union contracts are and use that as documentation. The domestic content, like Harley talked about, it's a certain percentage. We need to track the material origin. It gets a little complicated, but it's still doable to meet. And then Harley also talked about the targeted communities. Again, I would highly recommend you look at those maps because we found out 3 of our buildings are in an energy community, and I would have never known that because we did have a coal plant way back when. It's not operational anymore. So I didn't know that. Low-income community for schools, it's a little difficult because your building is landing, may or may not land in those low-income, but you're still serving all the kids in the low-income track. So you may or may not get that depending on where your building falls. Next slide. And then this is just our project schedule. So we did pass a referendum back in November 2022 when the IRA funding was just kind of coming online and being more and more publicized. And then throughout that time, we broke ground in November of 2023. We had a little bit more information. And then in January, February is where we started to really get more information on our IRA, and then we could make some good decisions on it. We do expect this building to be up and running on June 30th of 2025 for the start of the school year. That'll be September of 2025. And again, like I said, we expect to submit our direct pay for June 30th because our fiscal year is July 1st through June 30th. The IRS did change that ruling that it could go in your fiscal year and not the calendar year. So we'll submit on June 30th of 2025. And then we expect to receive that payment in 45 days so we can get going on the next payment. Next slide. And with that, I'll let Matthew take over.
All right, thank you, Brian. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Matthew Vanderpy. I am business representative for Smart Local 18, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about geothermal and how your unions can get more involved with direct pay. So next slide, please. For those of you that are not familiar with geothermal heating and cooling, geothermal uses the constant underground temps to allow for efficient heating and cooling. Now, this isn't a new technology. It's been around for a while, but it has been made much more efficient and less energy usage on it than it has been in the past. So it's a very valuable source to heat and cool buildings now, and on a much larger scale that we're doing it as well, too, as you can see in the Menasha School District. And from what Brian was saying too, you can definitely see savings. I think your energy savings were 135,000 is what Brian had said. So you think about the energy savings you can get from doing something like this and using the direct pay and going with geothermal, and just that amount of money that you could spend on other things. And then also with the strong labor standards, John had mentioned it before, we're creating careers, we're giving people opportunities. So with the the really strong labor standards attached to the IRA, that's something that us as union tradespeople are really excited about. Next slide, please. This is just kind of a typical commercial geothermal, what it kind of looks like. Obviously pretty big units. But like I said, using that constant underground temp really allows it to be much more efficient than like gas-fired or electric heat. Next slide, please. So what can locals do to find this work? First off, I would say assign someone or a group. I would suggest a group to start digging into all of the grants, rebates, tax credits that are out there for the kind of work that your craft is going to perform. And I would suggest a group because we kind of toyed around with a few things here in Local 18. I was doing this all on my own for a while. Right now I have a number of individuals in our staff helping me out, and believe me, having a group doing that is a way better way to attack it. The one thing that we started doing too is reaching out to state entities. So like the DOE, we reached out to the Office of Clean and Sustainable Energy in Wisconsin. So we've been working with them too. Reach out to the nonprofits like BGA. We work with Green Homeowners United. And then also the municipalities, the school boards, cities, districts. A lot of them don't know that this stuff is out there. So sometimes it's a good idea for you to kind of get with these people and let them know what kind of tax credits are available on a lot of this stuff and what kind of work that they can perform. Some of them don't realize that they can upgrade their HVAC system with some of the tax credits, grants, and incentives that are with the IRA. The next would be build working relationships with these entities so that they see you as a partner and a resource. Obviously, that's one thing that we pride ourselves greatly, I think, in all the trades is just our apprenticeship programs, our training, and our workforce. So as you partner with these people, let them know what you have to offer them. Let them see your training. Let them see what you guys are all about and let them know that you guys are the resource to come to when it comes to clean and sustainable energy. And lastly, I'll say is just stay on top of it. It can be a very daunting task once you jump into this. There's a lot of moving parts, but you will become the expert on it. And as you build those relationships with everybody, good things will come for you and your local union. That is all I have. I will pass it back to you, Harley.
Thank you so much, Matthew. So I just wanted to share my deep appreciation for all of the panelists. They put a lot of time and effort to bringing this information together. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. We had over 250 people registered. Just a reminder, we will share out a recording and we will share out the slide deck. So don't worry about that. And then I'll make a pitch. We're going to have a little survey that pops up at the end. If you don't mind serving that out, it just helps us with feedback as far as what other webinars we might put together and also the types of buildings that people are thinking about so we get a better sense of how to target our tools. And that'll also come in your email. So thank you again to everyone for joining and have a great rest of your day.